Chris Heilmann. I'm the Principal Program Manager for Developer Tools in Microsoft, and today I want to talk about JavaScript tooling and what we could do better. Now, traditionally, the JavaScript debugging world has been rough. We had like alert, where we got a lot of like object is not defined or undefined is not defined even. And we had the Windows script debugger. You might not know this one. The only person I've ever seen it use was Douglas Crockford when I worked with him. And later on, we had Firebug, and that's something where everybody rejoiced. Out of a sudden, we had in-context tooling in the browser directly as an extension. So we could see the CSS, we can debug the JavaScript, we can do all kinds of cool things of testing inside the browser and didn't have to have a third-party software that talks to the browser in some way. Opera Dragonfly was another one that was around back then, not that known as Firebug, but also pretty cool. And they all inspired the developer tools that we have in browsers nowadays. Almost every desktop browser actually has built-in developer tools, and they're all pretty amazing if you look at them. So in generally, we're actually in excellent shape. We've got excellent browsers, we've got good platform adoption, we've got open extensible editors like VS Code and others who are like open source and written in TypeScript themselves. And we have hosting with version controlling and hooks. I like, for example, that I can put some things in my version control and it automatically does the bundling and automatically does image optimization and these kind of things for me with GitHub hooks in this case, or any other platform would do similar things, I guess. And we got frameworks a minute. There's a new framework to make our life so much easier every minute, and we all have to use the newest and coolest one, and we can fight online who actually uses the best one. Now, you would think that all of this great tooling would result in great products, right? And they do to a degree, but it's also depressing when you look at the web right now and you just keep the developer tools open. The amount of error messages and random things that are coming from websites is overwhelming. The console is always full of stuff, and I don't know where that comes from. And to a degree, when you think about the state of tooling and the state of documentation, this is kind of disappointing. We should do better, and we should be actually faster in getting things better and concentrate more on the outcome than concentrate on tooling, because the tooling has come leaps and bounds, and we should be using what's there. So what is the reason why a lot of web development tools or a lot of web development products are actually in that state? Well, there's lots of them. The first of all is forgiving browsers. Browsers cannot break anything. Browsers are very forgiving. You give them any HTML and it does something out of it that resembles some semantic HTML and makes sense. When you talk to the browser makers, a lot of times they have a bad impression of web developers because of the state of the web. They look at what's out there and what the browser has to swallow and do something with, and they wonder as well why that happened. The other thing is that languages can be forgiving as well. If you come from a language that is very strict and you look at CSS, and any syntax error in CSS is just skipped. The next line is the next one that the interpreter does. So that is one of the cool things about CSS, but it also entices people to be sloppy. And basically, if the language doesn't give me any error, I probably haven't done any error. JavaScript has similar things as well. JavaScript is awesome, but there are some things in there that just confuse me, that not necessarily the language, but the implementation. For example, that every browser turns an HTML ID into a global variable, to me sounds dangerous. The same way hoisting kind of feels weird because it actually allows you to write sloppy code and the interpreter does things for you. Then there's, of course, full Stack Overflow development, as I call it. Just copy and paste things from Stack Overflow that you think make the thing that you want to do, change some numbers around and save it. And if nothing breaks, commit it. And actually, you've done some cool development. And there's third-party interference like ad software or tracking software, all kind of these Google tags that people put in there. So often when you see the final product, the developer is not to blame, but actually the middle manager that put lots of stuff in there on top of the code of the developer. And there's platform by committee. Sometimes you have to use a development platform or a framework because the company says so, or some new manager has bought the thing and now it has to be used. I had to use a lot of enterprise content management software and frameworks that I didn't think were the right thing for the job, but the company paid money for it, so we had to use it. And there's focus on high impact audiences. So all of our end users have iPhones. They're the ones that spend money. So why should I do something else for somebody on a slow connection or a bad browser? These are the people that bring our money. So let's only focus on those. And in general, developer tools are overwhelming. When I open the developer tools and I'm working on them, I see so many things I've never used and I'm confused about them. I don't know why they're in there. And now imagine if it's confusing for me and confusing for you, imagine being a beginner. A new beginner on the web gets the impression that everything is okay and you can make as many errors as you want because the browser will fix something for you. And at the same time, when they try to get some information from people, there's not much information there. There's just lots of options there and lots of opinions. People will tell you what they think the web should be like and what their best development environment is, rather than getting them a kickstart, a good base to actually understand what the web might be about and web development might be about. So when you look at it from a tooling perspective, there's the trinity of web development, as I call it. There's the editor, the IDE for coding. There's the browser for testing and tweaking. So after you develop something, you open the developer tools in the browser and you shift the colors around and the pixels until everything matches. And then you put it back into your code and you actually fixed it and made it perfect. Then there's the terminal for continuous integration, continuous development, and version controlling, and also the build scripts that we're running where we're doing all the bundling and the image conversion and these kind of things. These are great that we have these things, but the problem is we're focusing far too much on these tools. It's an opportunity to get bogged down in customization. When you look at the blog posts and the social media posts lately, everything is about customizing your IDE, customizing your browser, and customizing your terminal. Like, here's 500 VS Code extensions that make you a professional developer. And you're like, no, this is not professionalism. This is just trying more and more things out. When you think about it, you don't need much anymore. The browsers have a lot of cool things in their browser developer tools, and the editors also come with a lot of good stuff. The problem, though, is that we're not staying in one context. And this might seem simple, but it actually means a lot to our brain. So when I jump from one context to another, I get tired faster and I work differently. In the editor, I code. I'm the developer. In the browser, I'm tweaking. So I'm more of a designer. In the terminal, I'm again a developer, but in a different format and sometimes even a different language. And then the final web product is something that comes out of it. But in between, we keep jumping between these contexts and actually makes things worse. We're not actually concentrating on one thing. And the main thing that we forget when we talk about tooling is the learning aspect. Where do people learn about the impact of what they do? What does it mean to performance when I write this loop in a certain way? What does it mean for CSS rendering when I use when I create a new layer for every single element on the page? And that learning is somewhere else. That's in the documentation, that's in blogs, that's in courses, but it's not part of the development flow anymore. It's kind of somewhere else. We just assume that people have the knowledge before they do the tools. And I think that's pure arrogance. Because developer tools, and that's one of my main thinkings right now, shouldn't require expert knowledge. They should turn you into an expert over time when you use them. They should tell you when you're doing something wrong, and the more they tell you, the lesser you do it. The more you actually become an expert by just avoiding the bad things. And best practices and documentation, to me, should be part of the tool and not something you need to find elsewhere. You need to know where the documentation is. It should be part of the tool to tell you what you're doing right now is probably not a good idea. Here's how to do it better. So what have we been doing in that kind of vein, in that kind of idea? So let's think about what we can do to make things better. The first thing that every developer tool has in there right now in browsers is emulation. And I don't see it used enough. This is now the Edge developer tools with the emulation pane on. So I'm simulating a Moto G4 here, a mobile phone, and I can see what my site looks like in that mobile phone. You can also see that on the more right-hand side, there's a low-end mobile phone. This one changes the connectivity. So it's always bad when I've got a really, really well-connected computer and I test my things with it. And I think every user has the fast connection like that. By throttling my connection and also throttling the GPU and the CPU, I see what the end users see. And I sometimes find a lot of mistakes because my fast connection just glosses over them. So that's a really good way to test the rigidity and how good your app lives for the end users out there. There's also these colorful bars up there. These are your media queries. So if you just want to test your media queries without having to resize the browser all the time, you can just click those bars and make that happen there. You can simulate all kinds of devices. You can simulate all kinds of settings as well. So for example, there's a setting for dark and light mode of the operating system, and you can see how your app reacts to that. You can also set the reduced motion that people need sometimes just to read something. They can't have an animation because it distracts them. So you can set that one and make sure that none of your animations actually show up for those users. Now, this is really, really cool. Of course, the best thing is to get a real device and test on it as well. But you cannot test in all environments. But this is a very simple way to get you 90% on the way there to make sure that your end users can actually use your product. Now, a lot of people don't know that yet, but every browser can be automated. This is actually how we test the browsers internally. So our test framework runs the browser in the background and does all kinds of things against it. We don't have to do everything by hand. And there is a great NPM module or node script actually out there called Playwright. What Playwright does, it allows you to automate Chromium, WebKit, and Firefox at the same time. So you can say like, open this URL, create me a screenshot of the first page on all these 3 browsers. So you can automate the whole environment of the browser in a scripting language, and the scripting language is basically JavaScript. Works with all the JavaScript test frameworks as well. And it's a very simple way to get you started to automation. But what it meant for us is that we can actually automate the browser from other tools as well, not only from the command line. And we've done one thing to work against that context switching thing that I talked about, and that is an extension for VS Code called DevTools for VS Code. And that one embeds the browser DevTools inside Visual Studio Code. So you don't need to go away from the editor to the browser to start tweaking the CSS, but you can do it directly in the editor in VS Code without leaving it. The browser is in this little window, or you can have it in an own window as well if you want to. I like that little window because it's smoother. It just can keep everything on one screen. You can interact with it. This is a full browser. This is not a stream or something like that. This is a real interface of the browser, and you can right-click and click in it, set breakpoints, these kind of things. And if you set up your local machine or your local project, in this case a local host, properly, there's a two-way binding as well. So I can change it in the CSS tools, or I can change it in my editor, and both of those reflect the changes afterwards. So this means you don't have to go to the browser and back to the editor and the browser and back. Right now we have the Elements tool in there and the networking tool. If you want more of those in there, please talk to us, and at the end of the presentation I will have all the information how you can contact us. Now, we also found that the console was overwhelming. There was far too much information being accumulated just by surfing the web right now, and not many people use the customization options of the console. So we made it easier now by giving you this left-hand menu to actually say, like, only give me the things that I want to see. You can also filter by levels now. You can say a verbose level, or just the errors, just the console messages from yourself. And what a lot of people don't know is that drop down with top there, this one allows you to define the context in which the console runs. So this could be the top window, or you can also inspect different frames, iframes in themselves. We use this, for example, to debug the developer tools themselves, because they're also written in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Or we can set that debugger console to that instance of that browser or that developer tools instance at the moment. Now, if something is not an error or something that was logged, but you can see that up there, some messages have been moved to the Issues panel, we have a new Issues panel as well, newish. Issues panel is great because it shows you all the issues that your product has in terms of accessibility, compatibility, performance, security, and general pitfalls. And in the past, we had them all as one large thing, again, overwhelming you. So now these are all collected in different groups, and you can open them and close them and fix them one at a time. And the ones that don't apply to you, for example, if you build an intranet website, you don't care about PWA things too much, you don't need to worry about because they don't show up in that massive list of things to do. If you drill deeper into that little arrow again, then you get the information about the issue, but not only where it applies, also what it does. So you can say, learn why this is important there and there. And with accessibility issues, there's even further reading on another third-party website. Now, right now, this takes you into another window. I'm wondering what we can do better to actually show it directly in there, or would that be confusing? So please tell us about that as well. Now, some CSS things, some newer CSS things are actually quite complex, and the syntax is not as obvious for some people out there that come from other languages and are not embracing CSS much like I did over the years. So the biggest one is grids. Grids is incredibly powerful. For the first time, we have a real layout mechanism in CSS. We had Flexbox before, that was cool as well. But all the other things were hacked, like absolute positioning, floating left and right. All these things, table layouts, were all hacks. This time, we actually have a real way to do proper layouts in CSS, and we have a way to do that, to tell the browser to do the rest for us, and we don't have to worry about it ourselves. Now, with this new CSS grid tooling in developer tools, you can see in the source code there's a grid little lozenge next to it that says like, here's a grid to it. And if you click on that one, you can get an overlay of the grid showing you all the information about the grid. We also have another experiment in there called Source Order Viewer that shows you also the source order of the grid, because with a grid, you can make a very, very inaccessible interfaces for people with screen readers that cannot see, for example. They will get a different order than the order on the screen because the source order in the source of the document is different to the one, because CSS Grid allows you to put anything anywhere on the screen. So we're also working on some Flexbox visualizations and other things in there, and other more visual tools that make more sense to tweak visually also have visual tooling in there, like animations, and there's also overlays for all kind of other things. The inspector overlay now also gives you accessibility insights, like the color contrast, if it's enough. So a lot of things can be done to avoid making mistakes just by putting the developer tool and opening your website in it and just go around and test it. So what comes next? The question is now, what comes next? We do invest a lot in all of these things, and I love to hear what else we can do. I also would love to hear what you actually use and what you've never used the developer tools, because I find there's a lot of orphan things in there that's back in the days were very, very important, but are not making sense anymore. And I want to stop overwhelming new users of developer tools. I don't want to give them anything that they get confused about or feel stupid. I don't want any tool to make you feel inadequate. I don't want any tool to make you think you're the mistake, because most of the time you're not. If the tool is too complex, then there is a way to make it easier. And I think we should concentrate on making that easier. Now, one thing I also don't like is that we do a lot of, everybody concentrates a lot on normal end users, on users of the web when it comes to browsers. So when I open, for example, Edge, I get all this information about things I don't care about. It actually, I haven't changed anything here, so it shows me actually the weather in Berlin in Fahrenheit, which makes no sense either. But this is basically, a lot of users use that. They love it. But for me, it makes no sense. So I basically, like most other developers, set it to one search box, and that's basically it. But why? Isn't it actually cool if I open my browser in the morning and I get some information that is valid to me? So I found the other day this extension called Daily Dev that actually gives me development news just in the first page. And I found a few things that I cared about that way, but I think it's not enough. This is more or less like my RSS reader. There's nothing new there. What do you think we could do about this? Like, would you think, and I thought about this and we're testing it, how feasible it is at the moment, what would you do with a starting page like that? So I like, for example, having up there, I would love to have a search that is directly only for Stack Overflow and Moz DevNet, because most of the time I use Google to find and get results from those anyways. There's no point in me opening that extra tab and doing that extra search. Then I would love to see my work items there, what I have to do on the day, my bug reports, my pull requests, all the kind of things that are coming in that I need to answer immediately. And next to it could be the current projects and the status, what's going on with that status. I, for example, have to deal with a lot of accessibility reviews. So what is the current state of that product? Is it in the green or is it still red, or do we have to fix something? And below that, I would love to have the documents that I work with, like important email threads, the documents, the PowerPoints, the Word documents. These might not apply to you, but when you get into a program manager state, you will have those. And believe me, a lot of those. And then why not have some quick tip? And did you know, like a quick JavaScript tip of the day? I've done a lot of those lately on Twitter, and people like them a lot. Just like, oh my God, I didn't know there was in developer tools. Why not have something like that as the first thing when I open my browser? And then customizable tech news on the bottom. What do you think? Is this something that you would use, you would care about? If you have some ideas and you want to talk to us, I put up this quick survey. I'm not giving out free iPads or something like that. It's just 5 questions, and I would love to hear some information from you. I'm not going to the office anymore, so I don't have any stickers or anything to give away. I'm just at home, like all of you as well. So if you go to aka.ms, quick tools survey with dashes in between, I would love to hear what your ideas are. And what do you think some of the things that I talked about today make sense to you, or what we could do better? And in general, if you want to contact me or my team, I'm Chris Heilmann. I'm Code Poet on Twitter. Erika, Zohair, and Rachel are my colleagues who are all working as PMs on the Edge Dev Tools as well. We're also at Edge Dev Tools on Twitter. But if you're in the developer tools themselves and you find a problem, just click that little icon, and that one creates a report of the current website that you're on, a screenshot of it, and you can share telemetry with us if you want to, and then you can describe it, and that ends up directly in my bug list and maybe in the future on the start page of my browser. So that's all I had. So I thank you very much.